We do have some football talk to get to with the Ringer's Danny Kelly. He joins us on the Emerald Queen Casino Sportsbook Hotline. Hey, Danny, how's it going?
That's going great. How are you guys?
Fantastic. I mean, happy to be talking a bit of Seahawks here. It feels like there's nothing but potential and possibility, right? You're looking at a team that has the floor of like, well, there's a new head coach and he's figuring stuff out, and man, does this not look good? Or the highs of, oh, you found a head coach that's really special and you've got some nice players. So I'm trending towards maybe thinking this team could be a bit underrated heading into the season. I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, I definitely think that. I saw that they're over under for their win total of 7.5, which is the same as the Cardinals, which I just find to be kind of crazy. I just think this is a better team than that. I think they have the talent to be a playoff team. You know, I think conservatively, I'd pick them to win like 9 games, and you know, I think you can get a little more optimistic than that, assuming Mike McDonald was able to kind of turn the defense around and get them to stop the run and get them to rush pass a little bit better, which I think he will be able to do. So I'm pretty bullish on the Seahawks this year, actually.
When you look at the NFC West, I forgot who we spoke to, but they said, look, this might be one of the tougher divisions when it comes to quarterback play. I think people are expecting Kyler Murray to have a bounce-back year with Marvin Harrison. Obviously, Matthew Stafford is who he is. Brock Purdy is the manager that he is, baller that he is. And then there's Geno. How would you describe the quarterback talent in the NFC West?
Yeah, I mean, it's really solid, obviously. I think one of the better divisions from quarterback point of view in the conference. And I think, you know, every guy in the group is trending in the right direction. I think, obviously, like you said, Kyler, I think, he flashed definitely coming on late in the season last year, coming off the injury, and then gets Marvin Harrison. So he, I think, has a much higher ceiling this next season. They got a lot more talent around him. You know, Stafford remains one of the better players, one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL, in my opinion. You know, getting another offseason with Puka, getting Kupp healthy, like their offense could be even better next year than it was last year. It was really good already. And then, you know, 49ers, just one of the most balanced and talented, you know, offensive groups. Overall, their roster is probably one of the best rosters in the NFL. And so, yeah, it's a very tough division. I think that's the only thing that worries me a little bit about being excited about the Seahawks is they're going to have to contend with some really good opponents in the division. So there's no cakewalk, you know, divisional games for the Seahawks this year.
Well, and it feels like last year we talked so much about it being, quote, a down year for the NFC. Never mind that obviously there were great teams coming out of the NFC. The Lions were fantastic. The 49ers were fantastic. The Eagles were great and then fell off. It was weird. But now you've got an injection of quarterback talent, right? I mean, you're looking at what Jayden Daniels is going to do with Washington. You're looking at Caleb Williams with Chicago. How do you see the conference as a whole this year?
Yeah, and Jordan Love is like, you know, potentially going to be elite this year. You know, we'll see what happens in Minnesota. I think, yeah, you're right. Like a lot of the exciting rookies landed in this conference. And so that's really good, honestly, for the conference, because I think it was quarterbacks dominated the AFC. Like the AFC just looked a lot stronger in the long term at that position. You know, so getting Jayden Daniels, Caleb Williams, you know, we'll see what happens with J.J. McCarthy. You know, I think the future is definitely really bright for this conference. And, you can see Jalen Hurts, I think, had a little bit of a down year last year, but he's still one of the better quarterbacks. Same with Dak Prescott. So this is still a good, you know, the future, I think, is bright in this conference for the quarterback position, but there's a lot of question marks still with that, you know, with everything that's happening.
James Jones had an interesting take on Dak Prescott and Jalen Hurts. I talked about it on 4 Down Territory, going to do it again, but I'd like to get your opinion on it. He pretty much said, like, Dak Prescott is just the better quarterback. He does everything better than Jalen Hurts. Other than run the football, Jalen Hurts had 15 touchdowns on the ground last year. When you look at the two, who are you taking if you had to pick between those two quarterbacks?
Ooh, that's a good question. Do I get the offensive line that the Eagles have? I think that's probably a big part of it.
Right.
But, you know, I think Dak is more like a prototypical quarterback, like a drop-back passer. You know, pick apart the defense with his arm type of guy, very smart player. A lot of the work that he does is pre-snap and finding, you know, the weakness in a defense and all that stuff. Ultimately, I think I would pick Dak. But, like, the Eagles' system and the way that Hurts fits in that system is so unique and so dangerous and so hard to stop. And I think that's why, obviously, they gave him the big money deal. I think that's why he's one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL, even though he's not a traditional, just like drop back passer type guy. Like, I think, you know, in terms of pure passers, he's not an elite player. But when you look at the whole package, what he does on the ground, how unstoppable he is on the tush push and just short yardage in general, red zone, as a rusher. He essentially buys the Eagles an extra down because he's so good on 3rd and short and 4th and short. They're just like automatic in those areas. It's like a cheat code a little bit for them. And so I think, this is nothing against Hurts because I really like him. Ultimately, I think I'd go with Dak, but like Hurts in that system with that style of play is, arguably a more dangerous player, a harder to defend player, harder to scheme and game plan for. So, I like them both, obviously. But, I think if I'm picking, like I said, I'd go with Dak just based on, versatility and ability to fit into any system.
So I'm going to build on this, and maybe you can help settle a debate that was happening a bit earlier in the show. I was having a very friendly kind of back and forth debating this topic with a listener, and I know that listener isn't the only one who makes this argument. James Jones, in this same clip, is then asked by one of his co-hosts after he makes his case for Dak being pretty much better as a quarterback right now than Jaylen. He's asked, well, what about wins? What about winning? And then we kind of had a back and forth about, well, how much do wins matter when you're evaluating a quarterback? What do you think?
I mean, I don't think you can't really extricate the quarterback from that discussion. Obviously, I don't think wins are a pure quarterback stat.
Right.
But quarterbacks are the most important player by far, like pretty much in any sport, I would say. Like this, the quarterback has more influence and more effect on wins and losses than any other position in football by far. And so, obviously I think there's a correlation there between good quarterback play and winning. It's not like, pure like a quarterback stat, but I don't think you can necessarily separate them either. That being said, like, football is a team game. We see this all the time when rookies come in, really like promising, really exciting rookie quarterbacks come in and the guys around them, the team around them, if they're picking early, are usually really bad. It's really hard for even the best guys, like Trevor Lawrence comes to mind, to like elevate an entire team. So, there's a huge gray area here. I know this is like me sitting on the fence, but I think like quarterback is clearly very, very important and very correlated strongly to wins, but it's not everything. And teams, like the teams around you, the guys around you are super important. And obviously I think if you look at the roster for the Eagles, like they are one of the best rosters in the NFL, just stacked, so much depth at every position, so much talent at every position. And I think that obviously helps Jalen Hurts. And by the way, like I said, his system, the way that he's able to run that specific system, the way they design that system around him, I think is a great lesson in team building. Is you want to like focus on your players' strengths and talents and design your system around that. And I think Hurts is a great example of that.
So I love the answer, and I completely agree. And my pushback was that it was the most important stat. Like the single most important thing was wins. And I was like, what? Absolutely not. There are great quarterbacks out there who are career 500 quarterbacks. Justin Herbert is like 30-32. I think he's a wonderful talent. But we see it a lot, obviously, when we talk about Geno, people being like, he's a 500 quarterback. That's all he ever is. So if you aren't using wins as your number one stat to evaluate quarterback talent, is there something else you turn to where you just settle on like, look, I trust the numbers here, and it could be a couple different stats. It could be an eye test, whatever. What do you typically turn to be like, this guy's just good? Like the numbers don't lie.
Oh man, that's a tough question because there are so many quarterback stats. Obviously, you can't just look at like passer rating. I think like EPA per play is definitely one that's like started to get more traction in terms of like what people talk about when it comes to stats. But again, that's kind of like an offensive stat a little bit. There's a little bit of the entire team going and working there for what a quarterback does in EPA per play. So I don't think there's one skeleton key. I do think ultimately this is maybe going to be a little bit like controversial. I think passer rating is useful, to get you kind of in the ballpark. And then from there, you have to look at everything else. One stat that I have really started to look at a lot lately and I like is the pressure to sack ratio. I think obviously taking sacks is really, really bad from just a total offensive point of view. And especially if you narrow in on non-third down situations, I think like a player's ability to go, like get the ball out, get the ball to his playmakers, know where he's going with the football, have a good command of the offense. And I think you can see that in pressure to sack ratio. And so that's one stat that I really look at. But again, there's no skeleton key. That's why we have endless, discussions and arguments over who's the best quarterback, because there is no one like element to it that is really important. And there's so many different styles of quarterbacking now that it makes it pretty impossible. I know I'm like not really taking a stand, but I think it's just that's the nature of the beast. It's so hard to evaluate quarterback. It's so hard to play quarterback.
Well, this segment has officially become quarterback talk with the Ringer's Danny Kelly, because now I got another quarterback
Bump's
question
not happy
for you.
about it, though.
Yeah.
I got another one. Atlanta. I mean, Kirk Cousins goes there, and he's the guy. I think he still is the guy. Obviously, Michael Penix has to earn that job. Do you think Penix sits this year, or do you feel like there's a way that Kirk Cousins is completely healthy, he's playing decent football, but Atlanta turns to the lefty and says, let's see what he does?
I don't think if they're winning, they're going to play Penix. I think if they're winning or at least they're competing, if they completely fall off the cliff and are really, really struggling, and Cousins is a shell of his former self because of his ankle or his Achilles injury is not fixed, and there's just a million different things that could happen, I guess, early in the season where, they really, really struggle. I think that's a scenario where they turn to Penix, but I think ultimately he is a long-term play, which is, a little bit confusing because he's an older quarterback, and, of the quarterbacks that came into the draft this year, I think he's a little bit more ready to go. But I think ultimately he's sort of a long-term play for the Falcons. And this year they're really going to just rely on Kirk Cousins. He gives them, the potential to be honestly like a playoff team this year. They have a good offensive line. They have really good weapons. They've invested a ton at the offensive skill position groups like over the last few years. They've made some pretty interesting moves in free agency to bolster all those groups. I don't think their defense is particularly good, but they have some talent on that side. And if things come together, who knows? But I think just like the way this offense is going to be changed, sort of the Rams system, I think Kirk Cousins is the guy this year, in my opinion. That's the money that he has. And, I think that's the plan right now, that he's going to come in, elevate that offense, get them ready to go to the playoffs, and see what goes from there. And then obviously a year or two down the line, Michael Penix enters the picture.
We're talking with the Ringer's Danny Kelly, taking us back home. Just a couple minutes left here to talk about the Seahawks again. Danny, you're a Seahawks fan. Like you were originally, you were writing for Field Goals, amazing stuff. And that was during Pete Carroll's tenure, obviously, and with Russell Wilson under center and the Super Bowl era that they had. And now they're kind of entering this weird era. I've got a couple questions. I started going in another direction about quarterback, but I'm going away from it. I'm just Jane, enough quarterback.
This is the quarterback
I was going to ask a quarterback question,
Kelly.
but I'm going to instead go with this. I'm sure there is a lot that you loved about the Pete Carroll era Seahawks, and then some things that probably frustrated you. Is there anything that frustrated you, or that you are most curious to see if it changes under Mike Macdonald?
Yeah, I think obviously, there was a lot to love about the Pete Carroll era. I think the last 4 or 5, maybe 6 seasons, the defense has just really struggled to be, anything remotely similar to the Legion of Boom era. I think obviously, the league kind of caught up with what Seattle was doing. They didn't have the talent. I think, they tried to change things up, but ultimately the defense just has not been good lately. And I think that is the big thing for me, is like Mike Macdonald coming in, his reputation and this overall, like his defensive style, the reputation is, this is the forefront. This is the, if you have the Shanahan-McVay offenses, like on the other side, it's like this type of defense is what's hot. This type of defense is what could be, like the scheme that really starts to take over and people start to copy going forward. And so I'm really excited to see, how this defense is deployed, like what kind of production they can get out of some of the talent here. I think the Seahawks have a lot of talent on defense, and they just need to get, I think, a little bit more out of it. So I'm really excited to see what Mike Macdonald can do with that. I think his catchphrase is illusion of complexity. And I'm super excited to kind of study the ways that they do that, the way that they teach it. And again, if they can get a little bit more out of this defense. I'm a little bit worried about the linebacker position. But ultimately, I think this defense could make a big jump, and that could be enough to make Seattle a playoff team, because I think their offense is already really good, or at least above average. And, get a little bit more out of their defense and start to make things a little bit harder for opposing offenses. And it can change the whole dynamic. So yeah, again, I'm kind of like, if Mike Macdonald can be a defensive version of Sean McVay and sort of the type of guy who's changing the way, NFL teams scheme up their defenses, that would be huge for Seattle.
Do you think, you look at the receiving core, and obviously DK here in Seattle is the number 1 receiver. And we've had conversations about Tyler Lockett. He's 31 now. Maybe he's slowing down. And JSN, obviously, in his second year. do you see this year JSN becoming that number 2 receiver, or do you think that Lockett has a hold on him for now and Jason just has more work to do? I mean, obviously, his second year is still growing, but his potential this year as a possible number 2.
I mean, I'm not writing off Lockett. I think Lockett's still going to play a big role, but I would not be surprised if Jackson Smith-Njigba ends up with more volume and like a better stats than Tyler Lockett this year, just because, you know, this offense, obviously we don't know exactly what it's going to look like under Ryan Grubb, but I could see Smith-Njigba being kind of like a big target on short and intermediate plays, like get open early, get open and like give him opportunities to run after the catch. Obviously, you know, we joke around about it, but like Lockett is not a yards after the catch creator anymore at this point. Like he's kind of a catch it and fall down type of player. And so I think he could be more of a, you know, not a role player necessarily, but play his role as a deep threat guy who can take it to the top of a defense still, make a few important catches on like third downs and things like that. But like overall volume wise, I could see JSN really start to emerge as the number 2 guy, and, you know, be a big volume target over the middle of the field for Geno Smith. I think that's kind of like, he is to me like what the Jalen McMillan type of player that we saw for Washington for their offense, where he's just getting a lot of volume, playing out of the slot, being kind of a jack of all trades type of player. And I think that is what Smith-Njigba could do this year. So I think he's a big jump.
All right. Well, Danny's come on before to help us through the draft. We're past that, but we are just months away from fantasy football. And Danny also has you covered. Go ahead and bookmark fantasyfootball.theringer.com. The 2024 rankings are out. Also, make sure you're following him for updates there at Danny B. Kelly. Thanks so much, Danny.
Thanks, Danny.